You know, is anyone here an expert in Bakhtinian literary analysis? That's good. I can just say whatever I like then. Yep. You know, essentially, Mikhail Bakhtin, a Russian literary theorist, wanted to make a distinction between two types of literature. One was the epic and the other was the novel. In the epic, from the first word of it, it's single-voiced, inexorable. You know exactly where it's going, you know. It's very boring, but it's very clear, you know. In a novel, there's all sorts of possibilities being opened up. It's contested, it's indeterminate. You don't know ahead of the novel, a good novel, where it is. But in a novel, you've always got a plot. So it's not just, you know, it's not just everything going on really messy with no... You can lose the plot as a novelist, yeah? So there's a difference between having a plot that's coherent and having an epic where there are no contesting voices. There's only one message going on. So I guess in the colourful school, there's lots and lots of voices, but not much plot. Respect. Yep. It's one thing to say I respect every person in the room, so I respect all you guys, right? But it's another thing to say, but I also respect the tradition. I also respect the Catholic faith that is the reason for us all being here. So in this one here, you're getting respect for the people, but not necessarily much for the tradition. In this one here, you're getting both and. It's a respect for not only everyone's right to hold the view they do, but also for the fact that we're here for a reason. This school was built for a purpose. We have a mission here that we're faithful to. And faithfulness to that mission means that Catholic stuff is always placed in the centre of learning experiences, not in an imposing way, but in an invitational way. So going back to Bakhtin, there is a Catholic plot here, even though there's many contested voices which enrich the narrative. So now you can all go away and call yourselves experts in Bakhtinian literary analysis and relate it to a Catholic identity. I think there's something there. What about if you just have a buzz for a couple of minutes? I don't really need to spell all that out to you guys because you've been living, looking around, some of you, very long time, myself included, and others, in fact, most everyone, very short time, you know. Don't worry, be happy. So essentially, if you haven't been living inside the tradition, the problem is those connections don't get made. So there's nothing wrong with this approach as an entry approach, point of entry approach. The problem you get is that people aren't specific and particular, making the links to what it is in our Catholic tradition that relates to the topic. So stopping at simply the value side of things, just talking about healing but not getting into what's underneath that. Talking about friendship or forgiveness without getting into the Christian narrative underneath that. So it's implicit in a values frame, all the stuff that sits underneath it. As soon as you start getting explicit and drawing from the Catholic well, as it were, explicitly and particularly to make the topic have elements of encounter with the tradition in its explicitness or in its particularity. I said I wouldn't use jargon there, I'm getting into it there, but I think we're all grown-ups here, so a bit of the analysis I hope you're already across. So this shift here I think is A, the most important, and B, the most difficult to grasp as to what's actually going on here. So in this one here, I just like to use the word context, you know. In a reconfessionalising approach, the only thing that matters is the tradition. You know, I've got a Catholic worldview that I've already figured out, and it's really just explaining to you what that Catholic belief is, and you accept that. That's what being evangelised is. No reference to your context, your situation, because the Catholic truth is true for all time, all places. So context doesn't matter when you're in this space here, in its most extreme form. In this one here, the only thing that matters is context, not the faith tradition per se. So what matters here is what's the language that kids use, because that's the language I'm going to use. Yeah? So forgiveness will be spoken about in a way, secular terms, because we'll just use the cultural dominant discourse and we'll be content with that. We won't feel the need to be explicit about the faith side of things. So here is a great respect for the tradition. Here's a great respect for the person's context. Here is a respect for both. It's a bit like the previous one with dialogue and colourful. Colourful respects the varying views of individuals, whereas dialogue does that but also says we are here in a Catholic narrative. So it's a Catholic narrative that's enriched by diversity, but it's a Catholic narrative nonetheless. In the colourful it's just diversity, in here it's just context, in here it's just the truth claim of the tradition, and in here it's what meaning does the tradition have for me in my context? It's a recontextualisation, a recontexting of the eternal faith, if you want to use those categories. So the eternal faith is never understood apart from context, it's always understood inside a context. But if same thing again. What does it mean to draw from the Catholic well? You know, open up that Catholic treasure box using the gospel image of the kingdom, you know. Essentially, any religious tradition under this sociological analysis will have things like ethics in it, which are how should I live, beliefs about the way the world is, the way that God is, stories, sacred texts. So whether it's Buddhism or Hinduism or Baha'i or whatever it might be, prayers and rituals, symbols, certain structures and so forth. So that's a little conceptual map of any religious tradition. And those of you who've taught texts and traditions might even be able to guess which book this comes out of. So it's just a little diagram of any tradition. And what I've done here is just put around the outside of that a bunch of aspects of school life. You know, you've got your partnerships with family and parish, you've got your staff formation programs, your justice program, prayers and retreats, liturgy, policies, your understandings of pedagogy, who the human person is and how the human person learns, curriculum and so forth. You can have, for example, sacred text happening in the curriculum. You could have symbols happening in staff formation. You can have prayer happening in a justice program, etc. You know? So when you say drawing on the Catholic well, this is what I mean by that, drawing on it explicitly and particularly. If you want to be spiritual,